It's not often that we get to talk about a controversial Blizzard decision and actually try to defend it, or at least explain why it does kind of make sense. This might sound crazy, but they're making some unexpected sacrifices, and they're trying what a bunch of people wanted for years, and that is a second chance. A what if on Warcraft history. And to get there, we're going to have to talk about three things: Cataclysm, organ donation, and Elden Ring. Oh, and today's sponsor. Audible, the place to get your audiobook fix. Especially if you're into Warcraft, because they've got all the hits. Now, you can get Dawn of the Aspects and the others free. Try Audible for free for 30 days at audible.com/Bellular or text Bellular to 500 500. Okay, Dawn of the Aspects is a foundational Warcraft book. It tells the story of how the Dragonflights, all those big characters like Alexstrasza, how they came to be. One of the tantalizing parts of the Dragonflight expansion is, seeing their ancient history, seeing their ancient culture, and in this book, you'll actually learn how they were before those times, before the construction of Tirshold, back when they were just beasts scratching by in the frozen wastes of Northrend. And speaking of Tirshold, well, it's the new hub city in Dragonflight, and in this book, you'll meet its namesake, Tyr. Now, I've had Audible for years, and, with life being busy, it's great to listen to audiobooks when I'm taking a walk, when I'm driving, or when I'm just leveling up or hanging out in WoW. All the audiobooks you get with the sub are yours forever, even if you cancel it. That's just fantastic. So go and get your first audiobook credit free with a 30-day trial at audible.com/Bellular or text Bellular to 500 500. Audible, thank you, and let's go. So what's going on? Well, back in 3.3, two UI features were added: the Random Dungeon Finder and Quest Tracking. The Random Finder has been blamed for killing much of the social factor of World of Warcraft. Many people said it back in the day, and I would know because I was actually there. And it's also undeniable that World of Warcraft's quests have gotten streamlined, faster to complete, and ultimately quite frictionless over the years. Even things like world quests, they're devoid of story and context for the most part. They're kind of just tiny dots on the map to clear mindlessly for a small, essentially meaningless reward. Now, the Classic team already addressed the Random Dungeon Finder. They said, in spite of a lot of people wanting it, that they're not adding it, even though it was in 3.3, the patch that Wrath Classic is essentially running on. However, back in April, they also said they would leave out quest tracking. In an interview, the lead software engineer said this: "We're not going to put that in because it was out in the very last patch of Wrath of the Lich King, and it changes the way you play the game. And we know some players don't want it put right in their face. They want to be able to experience the game where they're reading the quest text, exploring the world, and trying to discover where those things are, sending them to, and have that kind of immersive experience of living throughout the world and exploring that through the quest text." The principal systems designer then followed up by saying, "We don't make these kinds of changes lightly." He said that when you're forced to read text, you are forced to think about the world, the NPC, and their motivation. But when you have the UI solving the problem, you ignore the world, you don't get immersed, and you just do what the UI tells you to do. Looking at their recent post on the design pillars of this project, you can instantly see why it would make sense to them. They want the Classic project to nurture and protect social experiences. They want to ensure the world is the main character. The Dungeon Finder and quest tracking actively hurt both of those things. On paper, that all sounds wonderful, but the world is obviously a different place, and you see that as soon as you look at how people are responding. A lot of players are angry, saying, well, everyone's just going to use Questy, they're just going to continue using it. Or people saying, but I liked that feature. Or even, every game has this because it's just common sense, and removing it is dumb. We'll get to that one later. And in a way, most of them are 100% right, actually. It is a quality of life feature that add-ons were doing anyway, and even before add-ons, people just use Thoughtbot. But there's a difference between using add-ons or a website and then the game doing it itself. Questing officially turned into just run or fly to the blue bit in the map and do it. And that was a major paradigm shift in how players were expected to play the game. But we have just found out that the developers themselves may have actually changed their mind on this since April. While the tracker is not in now, they do intend to implement it, quote, at some point, saying that their thinking has changed quite a bit. So right now, we don't know if that means during beta, before launch, or in a phase after launch. Let's talk. Should it actually be added? And let's not jump to conclusions. Let's not have knee-jerk reactions. Let's actually think, because there is something massive to learn from this. Quest tracking was added to Wrath in 3.3, 13 months after launch, and as Mr. GM points out, 3.3 until Cataclysm was actually 44% of Wrath's lifetime. And looking at the subgraph, most of Wrath was flat until it hit some growth toward the end, just after 3.3, peaking at 12 million during the transition to Cataclysm. This is where the quest tracking features and Dungeon Finder were added, and here we see a bit of growth afterward, leading of course to Cataclysm, well, dropping the ball. And if you took all of this at face value, it does look like 3.3 was a marked improvement with those features. But whatever changed in Cataclysm, well, that was actually the problem. So was it? Well, here are some quotes from a PC Gamer review. One that gave the game a 93 and celebrated a lot of the change, but also one that had creepily prophetic ideas. Quests introduced in Cataclysm are brisk, fun, and over in the blink of an eye. Quest hubs have 5, maybe 10 quests max, and can be burned through in 10 minutes. Giant arrows in your map show you where to go. Any objects you need to collect are marked with a twinkle. Any monsters that need to die are highlighted with red text. Hover your cursor over them, and the game will tell you how many need to die and why. The flow never stops moving around you, never lets up. And something has been lost with this new quest approach. One of the thrills of old WoW was exploring, discovering the world at your own pace. New WoW is a conveyor belt in which you input time and output a level 85 Goblin Mage. What changed? That's the question. And the answer is not the people. The only real difference, that was just Tom Chilton taking over from Jeff Kaplan. Most of the other key staff, including most of the designers responsible for actually making the quests, were the same. The output changed though, so why? Well, here's a thought. Cataclysm's quests were the first quests in a game created after Blizzard added the quest tracker. This means the quest designers no longer had to give you directions within the quest text, or give you a sense of place in that text, because many of these functions were handled by the tracker. All they had to do was type, go kill some stuff for some reason, and the game's UI did the rest. And imagine you're one of the only handful of designers tasked with rebuilding the entire world while also making new zones. Do you waste your time building that massive sense of scale and world when you technically don't need it anymore? When a UI handles all this stuff? Hell no. You've got hundreds of new quests to make. And we know that this was a crunchy, extreme, challenging time for the team. Essentially, the new style should be more fun anyway, so players won't miss it. Tons of them use Quest Helper and Thoughtbot anyway, so this is clearly what the players actually want. Now, Josh Strife Hayes has a video that recently came out called Wild Old MMOs Feel Better, explaining this.
Put simply, if something is easy to do, you'll feel good in the process but not care about the reward in the long term.
The whole video was great, but his point is that the adversity of having to actually deal with things like parsing quest text, understanding what it means, and some of the lack of quality of life, that is what, in a way, made older MMOs more memorable, made them feel good. Because human psychology dictates that we feel rewarded for pushing through adversity. Now that feels obvious, but we actually did find a little bit of science to back that up. In a study from 2012, people were asked to complete math questions for a monetary reward while their brain was being monitored. Okay, and the researchers found that the size of the reward only mattered when the question was high effort. That's fascinating. Basically, When we're forced to try, the outcome matters to us more. It does kind of make sense. Whereas, to quote Josh again, modern Blizzard design seems to be to remove all adversity at the expense of long-term satisfaction. And it makes sense, because humans are hardwired to take the path of least resistance. And that might mean playing another game instead. So if you're an old-school MMO, trying to feel deeply meaningful over time, that's a cool goal, but other games are going to be more seamless and easier to pick up. And that means you're going to lose out in the market. The point is that the quest tracker was one of the first dominoes that turned classic WoW into something modern. Something that is genuinely different in how it feels to play. And certainly if you think about how you play WoW now, and if you're a vet like me, how you played it a bit more towards the start, you'll know it's different. At the time, that was a different that Blizzard bet on. It's also a different that saw their subscriber numbers collapse. Of course, Cataclysm did have successes, it also had failures, but everyone can agree that it was an expansion of change. And it was the first expansion built with match-made dungeons and a quest tracker in mind. We don't know if a world without those things would look better, and we cannot change the past. But the classic team have a chance to try it today. And while it seems they have been dissuaded from taking that chance, they quite evidently, as of a few months ago, really wanted to take the shot. We'll talk about if it can be done later today, but first, let's go back to this. Essentially, the new style should be more fun anyway, so players won't miss it. Tons of them use Quest Helper and Thoughtbot anyway, so this is clearly what the players actually want. It sounds like I'm suggesting that players are the problem here, and that the classic team are just trying to force players into doing hard work to feel satisfied. And that's actually kind of right. That sentiment is actually part of some classic game design wisdom. Soren Johnson and Sid Meier said on Civilization 4, given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. And so, one of the responsibilities of designers is to protect the player from themselves. This is the sort of thing that might, as a player, feel like a deeply offensive thing. All it really is understanding and acknowledgement that people will take the easy way out, they will take the path of least resistance, and if they do that, they're not going to feel particularly satisfied. So, as a designer, you have to make sure that doesn't happen. And if you did feel a bit offended at that, just think about an FPS that has loads and loads of different enemies and loads of different guns. But there's like one or two guns that are clearly the most powerful, so those are the only ones you use, even though the other ones might be super fun. An example of a critically lauded game that understood this problem was Doom Eternal. The way that they balance their ammo and their various different systems mean that swapping of weapons is core to the experience. That's one of the ways that they protect players against just tunneling in a tiny thing. So, how do you fight against human psychology? The drive to do the easy way? Well, it's to use another part of human psychology. It's called the default effect. There's a paper called Do Defaults Save Lives? And it found that organ donation was substantially higher, between 85 and 99%, in countries where it was the default to donate. But it was a lot lower when it was not the default. Now, in a United States survey, 85% of respondents approved of organ donation. The idea that, let's say there's a car accident, something happens to you, you don't need your organs anymore, your organ could perhaps save somebody else's life. But only, even though 85% approved of it, only 28% had actually signed up for it. And the reason? Because it was an active choice, because it wasn't default. Final Fantasy XIV's director, Yoshi P, has actually got a whole column about this too, saying that essentially their user data really surprised them. That the overwhelming majority of players just use the default UI settings. They don't actually customize it. In WoW, the default is no add-ons. Players will first try to play the way that the game asks them to play. And then they'll end up downloading add-ons like Questy, which is in fact the 5th most popular thing on CurseForge, by the way. So they can get that if they need to. It's an option, so I suppose no harm, no foul. Ultimately, Wrath introduced some of the features that some players credit for killing the social and immersive parts of World of Warcraft. So, people would argue that the Classic team should try to keep those things specifically out, specifically to preserve those 2 pillars that we talked about at the start, to stop the declassicing of World of Warcraft. So that raises a question. Where do they go after this? Now, like Ian told Asmongold, they know what's up. They know that Cataclysm was the beginning of the end, and they want to know what we want them to do next with the Classic project. To take a massive hit of the old hopium, them trying out a some changes Classic opens a door for a what if of World of Warcraft. What if development continued without these philosophical changes that were the beginning of the end? And remember, that's Blizzard acknowledging that Cataclysm is the beginning of the end for many, many players. So they know that something changed, that changed the experience in a way that just couldn't go back in the box for a lot of people. This could be an experiment to see if players will accept a Wrath 3.3 that has all the benefits of 3.3 that are perhaps the least controversial, but that does try to actually be more classic than it originally was. And to me, that sounds like Classic Plus. We can only wait and see the results of this experiment, if they even choose to do it, which now looks very much up in the air. But there's an example that actually mirrors this entire dilemma beautifully. In February, Elden Ring showed up and absolutely captivated millions of players, all because it took those common sense decisions about waypoints and quest trackers and the UI playing the game for you and other modern design things, and Elden Ring fired them in the bin. It was an industry-defining success, one that destroyed notions about what a game experience should be. It basically was classic, with arcane lore that requires tons of reading to finally click, rich environmental storytelling that's easy to miss, meaning it's a reward when found, and a carefully selected set of quality of life features left out on purpose. And players loved it. They loved being forced to learn this game's rules, this world's rules. They loved understanding the world. And it pissed off a lot of veteran Western game developers. Game developers who were doing all their tweets about how that type of design was bad, and it sparked an entire "Are quest markers ruining video games" debate in the industry. Let's just say many's a Horizon Forbidden West developer made a bit of a tit out of themselves on Twitter and was resoundingly dunked on. The kind of developers, I suppose, who would say, you think you do, but you don't, were ultimately proven wrong here. You don't need that stuff. It even made Assassin's Creed Valhalla players angry because they had to come in, the team, Ubisoft, and remind players that their game actually had a mode that hides waypoints and forces players to learn the world and explore. But as we just talked about with organs, it wasn't the default, so few people were aware of it and fewer still used it. Who knows? Maybe they do have the intricately written dialogue and stuff to actually make their quest shine without markers. But because the default experience was markers, we'll never really know. And if Elden Ring can be a reminder that immersion in a world and a controlled level of adversity to overcome is an experience that people want, even if they need to try and get players to accept it, why can't World of Warcraft at least give the same thing a try? We think we don't, but maybe, just maybe, we do. I'm going to leave you in a very final anecdote, my personal angle in this. Borean Tundra is a zone that is not liked by people. The boring tundra. Well, I actually remember when I went through the tundra and I read all the dialogue. Do you know what? It was way more interesting. Way more interesting. I actually navigated around the place. I kind of knew what the characters wanted. There was definitely a few cases where I kind of wished storylines, now that I was interested in them or invested in them, went a bit further. But it meant that what they actually built, I saw and appreciated. That ain't what happens with a quest tracker, I'll tell you that much. So there you go. Okay, that's it for today's video. Hit up our sponsor down below, of course, if you want some of that delicious audiobook action, which I'm certainly very into myself. Let me know what you think about this undoubtedly fiery topic in the community. I'll see you next time.